Hi, sixth grade. Today we are going to continue our study on cells, but our focus is going to kind of shift from the plant and animal cells and the organelles that make them up, and we're going to start looking at how we can classify cells. We have classified everything from matter to rocks, so it shouldn't surprise you that we're now going to talk about how we can classify cells. Really, if you look, there are two big groups that we can place cells into. We can place them as prokaryotic cells, or they can be eukaryotic cells. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at the differences between the two cell groups and then also some of the similarities. And if we kind of start off here, this is what a prokaryotic cell would look like. You guys have not had any experience yet with prokaryotic cells. A very good example of a prokaryotic cell would be a bacteria cell. In this section, we're going to really focus on prokaryotes, and so you're going to get to explore bacteria even more. We have focused on more eukaryotic cells so far. Plants and animals and their cells, those would be all eukaryotic cells. So you're going to have a lot of experience over here with this group and not so much experience with this group over here. So what I want to do right now first is just kind of take a look at what are some of the differences that we see sticking out right away. And the first big difference, actually, we can figure out by looking at the meaning of the words prokaryotic and eukaryotic. You'll see that both words have kary in them, or kernel, which also stands for nucleus. So we have nucleus over here and nucleus over here. Now we need to look at the prefixes for each word. Pro, I'm not sure if you've gotten this word in language class yet or not. Pro actually means before. So the word prokaryotic means before nucleus. The prefix eu stands for true. Now, it might seem a little bit weird. True nucleus, before nucleus, what does that really mean? Well, if you look at a eukaryotic cell, we know that plant and animal cells both have a nucleus to them. So it has a true nucleus. You can see that membrane. It's there holding in the DNA. If you look over here at this bacteria cell, before nucleus, that means that the bacteria cell doesn't have a nucleus whatsoever. And you can see that the DNA is just kind of floating there inside the cell. So that is one very big difference. Prokaryotic cells, no nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, nucleus. Now, let's take a closer look at this little bacteria cell. We've taken a look at the DNA. And what you'll actually know if you take a close look at this DNA, it looks kind of tangled right now, but if we were to untangle it, the DNA is actually in a loop. So we could untangle that DNA and it would be in a circle. Whereas the DNA in a eukaryotic cell, we have a whole bunch of individual strands. So that's another big difference between the two. Prokaryotic cells have a circular ring of DNA, whereas our eukaryotic cells, they have the individual strands. The other things that we're seeing in this cell here, these little orange dots are ribosomes. The orange fluid inside the cell is a cytoplasm. And then we have a plasma membrane, a cell wall, and then on the outside of that we have the capsule. And on this capsule are these little things, it's called a pilus. Each one of these is a pilus. What the pilus does is it allows the bacteria cell to kind of hook on to another cell, and it's how it transfers its DNA over. And you'll kind of learn a little bit more about that later on in the section and how bacteria actually work and how they make us sick. But the pilus is very important for infecting other cells. And then over here, this funny little whip-like looking thing is called the flagellum. And this is what helps the bacteria cell to move. So it can whip back and forth, or it can go round and round and round, kind of like a little helicopter type thing, in order to move the cell through liquid. So now that we've kind of taken a look, that's all there really is to take a look at with the bacteria cell. It's very simplistic. Let's take a look back and with the back-to-back of the bacteria cell and the eukaryotic cell. So another difference that you should be seeing is that there aren't many organelles inside the prokaryotic cell. And really, there's no membranes. The ribosomes, remember when we took a close-up look at what the ribosomes looked like? They kind of actually looked all like that. Okay, so those ribosomes didn't have any membranes around them. The ribosomes in the prokaryotic cells don't either. They have no organelles whatsoever. Whereas the eukaryotic cells have tons of organelles that are membrane bound. The nucleus is a big membrane. The ER is made up of membranes. The Golgi is made up of membranes. The vesicles and the lysosomes, those are made up of membranes. Our mitochondria, those are double membraned organelles. So our eukaryotic cell's filled with membranes, whereas the prokaryotic cell isn't. All we have is the DNA and the ribosomes. And so because of that, that actually leads us into another difference, is that the prokaryotic cell is very much less complex than what the eukaryotic cell is. Eukaryotic cell, super complicated. Prokaryotic cell, super simple. Okay? Now, one other difference that we can look at, back at the beginning of our cell unit, we talked about organisms and that we can have multicellular organisms or unicellular organisms. Our prokaryotic cells, they are always going to be unicellular. They're only going to be one-celled. Eukaryotes, though, they can be made up of many cells and be multicellular, or they can be unicellular. And so an example of a unicellular eukaryote would be an amoeba. See, it has a nucleus, and then there are some lysosomes in it. It's very simple, but it still would be considered a eukaryotic cell. And then we also have a paramecium over here. And so the paramecium right there is its nucleus, and then it has some vacuoles and things in it. So again, very simple compared to our multicellular cells, but nonetheless, it does have a nucleus, and so that's why it's a eukaryotic cell. One thing too that I kind of want to point out here with the amoeba and the paramecium, we talked about these early on when we first started talking about cells. Remember, you can find them in pond water a lot. So it's where, if you're wondering where those two cells kind of came from. Okay, so really the only other difference between the two, and it's really kind of hard to show in my diagrams because I never have my diagrams to scale, is the size. Eukaryotic cells are much, much larger than prokaryotic cells. So if we actually shrink this down, there you go. Prokaryotic cell, eukaryotic cell. And so because of their size, it actually makes them much easier to kind of replicate themselves or reproduce. They're very simple and they're very small. So they're going to reproduce really, really easy, which makes sense because bacteria, they want to reproduce very easily so they can infect their host, which in turn makes us sick. So there is kind of the overview on prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Now, you really haven't taken many notes on this, so what I want to do is instead of taking regular notes, we're going to work on making a Venn diagram. So go ahead and pull out your Venn diagram, and you're going to put prokaryotic cell in one circle and eukaryotic cell in the other. And we're going to go through and talk about, okay, what were the differences? So one difference, I want you to go through and do your entire diagram first on your own, and then come back and kind of check and see with me. So I kind of show you, you have 4 differences on each side, and then 4 similarities. So pause the video, do your diagram, and come back. Okay, so your diagram should be complete if you're looking and watching me right now. Our first difference that we're going to talk about, prokaryotic cells are single-celled. Eukaryotic cells can be single-celled or make up a multicellular organism. Next difference, prokaryotic cells, no nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, nucleus. Think plant and animal cells. Third difference, prokaryotic cells have no organelles. The eukaryotic cells are filled with organelles. Our prokaryotic cells, because they don't really have any organelles, they're really simple and they're very small. Our eukaryotic cells, there's a lot going on in there. They are complicated and they're much larger than the prokaryotic cell. So now for our similarities. Both types of cells are going to have DNA. Both types of cells are going to have ribosomes. Both types of cells are filled with cytoplasm. And both cells have that plasma membrane or that cell membrane to them. So hopefully you have a better idea of the differences between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Your job now is going to be able to actually classify cells into groups based on some of the characteristics that you're seeing.